Hello, this is Charles Reed Anderson, and I'm the head of the Telecoms Mobility practices for IDC Asia Pacific. And today we're going to talk around the top 10 mobility predictions for 2014. Our first prediction is the death of BYOD as an enterprise strategy and the birth of CYOD. Now, everyone's pretty familiar with the bring your own device or BYOD phenomenon that we've seen in recent years. But in this year, we predict that BYOD will be replaced by CYOD, or choose your own device, as an enterprise strategy. In choose your own device, enterprises select a number of different types of devices, and it could be a couple of different manufacturers, a couple of different operating systems, but they want to minimize the number of devices coming into the enterprise. And the reason they do that is it allows them to expand the mobility offering and move beyond mobilizing the person and mobilize the process. And why this is important is that when you mobilize the person, there's considerable costs that are associated with it. So this has been driven by BYOD, but there are costs to manage the devices, support the users, secure the content, and those costs outweigh the benefits. So while BYOD has been important, and it might underpin a mobility strategy, it's definitely not an effective mobility strategy, particularly when you move into phase 2, which is about mobilizing the business process. And this is where BYOD becomes replaced by CYOD. And the difference between the two phases is that by mobilizing a business process, enterprises are able to deliver tangible business benefits, or benefits that can be measured, whether it's through increased revenues, decreased costs, streamlined business operations. And by doing that, it makes it of value to the organization. And if you're going to do this, though, it does require a robust mobility strategy. And part of that is actually understanding what types of devices you're going to roll out the applications on. So BYOD can become unmanageable, but CYOD is much more manageable for IT and will allow them to mobilize their business process. The final phase is when companies start mobilizing the channel. And this is when you move beyond to just your employees. You start mobilizing your interactions with your customers, with anybody throughout the value chain. And this is where enterprise mobility strategy becomes core to the business strategy. So most companies aren't at that stage yet. In fact, most of them are still in the earliest phases. And we can illustrate that by going through IDC's enterprise mobility maturity model. And to make this simple, stages 1 and 2 are basically the earliest phases of mobility. It's when you might allow people to bring devices into the organization through a BYOD initiative. Or you might even have a hosted mobile device management solution. What you probably don't have in those phases is a detailed strategy, a roadmap of applications that you would like to launch, and a robust security policy. And those start to come in stage 3, and that's when it gets to being repeatable. So this is when maturity becomes mature inside the organization. And when you move into stages 4 and 5, it's much more about driving competitive differentiation and business transformation, and changing the way that you leverage mobility. And it's not just mobility internally, it's changing the customer experience as well. So when we did this survey, we asked 1,600 companies where they fit in, and we asked them a number of questions around their strategy, their security policies, their application roadmaps, how they fund and support their mobility offerings. And 21% of the companies we surveyed scored too low to even be ranked in stage 1. And then there was another 57% in stage 1. And these are the areas where BYOD has a strong presence. But what we'll see this year is more companies moving into stage 2 and 3, which changes over to CYOD. And this is where companies will begin to mobilize the business process and become much more towards that repeatable phase. So once again, BYOD will not go away. It will still be inside of many enterprises. But those enterprises will not be successful in mobilizing the business process or moving forward with a robust mobility strategy. Our second prediction is about connected intelligence everywhere, and this relates to the Internet of Things. And I'm sure everyone's heard quite a bit about this over the past year. It's about connecting consumers, homes, buildings, offices, cities, and users themselves. And there's a great amount of excitement within the industry about what this can actually create by 2020. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of the solutions that will be supporting that and underpinning these great new ones for the future exist today. And when you look at it, a lot of it's been done around machine to machine, where you have a module or a device that connects to a platform and into an application. And this machine-to-machine scenario has been around for 25 to 30 years already. And what we're really going to do is look at evolving that and connecting it to more things to create the Internet of Things. Where it starts to get more interesting and more challenging, though, is because of the number of things that are being connected now. There's a ever more concern about how you're going to secure that channel. I'm sure many of you would have heard about recently about how the first Internet of Things spam email attack happened from a refrigerator, and someone hacked into a refrigerator and was able to send many messages out to the public based on it. Another area of interest on this is that all of these different modules will be capturing information, and now we're looking for the analytic firms to come in there and start analyzing that information. And on top of all of this, it's the professional services who can actually pull this service wrap together. And then all of it is underpinned by the third platform technologies: mobility, cloud, big data analytics, and social. So this is the ecosystem that will drive the Internet of Things. And what you'll see is all of it is available today. But what we're looking for are the innovation drivers who can come in and actually bring it forward. And in particular, we think that many of the new startup ISV application vendors will be driving a lot of innovation. And the reason is because they will look for people who have detailed vertical industry expertise to deliver solutions for the future. And you need this detailed understanding of the vertical industries. And unfortunately, most, if not very few, of the IT vendors will have that level. Another area for innovation are the analytics vendors, because they're going to be analyzing large amounts of data, and they will be able to generate new revenue and support models on the top of that. Our third mobility prediction is customer first, mobile first. And we see this as becoming quite an exciting year for mobility, because mobility isn't going to just be part of the strategy. For many companies and new market entrants, mobility is the strategy. Many companies are already leveraging mobility to interact with their employees, but now we're seeing many more of them move out and change the way they interact with their customers and with every vendor throughout their value chain. And there is a lot of stats within Asia Pacific to support why this region should actually be leading in this. Number one, more mobile devices than PCs are used to access the internet in Asia. And if you look at somewhere like Indonesia, 3 times as many mobile devices are used to access the internet as PCs. So you have to ask, if you're an enterprise targeting users in those countries, should you be developing a site for a PC first, or you should be developing a mobile application first? Another stat, which unfortunately is not an IDC statistic, but rather this comes from the South Korean government. 1 in 5 Korean students are smartphone addicts, which means they spend over 7 hours a day on their mobile phones, their smartphones. Now this sounds crazy, but think about it. If people are leveraging their devices and this next generation of the Gen Z consumers, everything is mobile for them. So why are companies not taking advantage of it? And we are starting to see the emergence of some vendors who are, though. What we've seen is eBay recently launch a fashion site in Brazil, and they launched it first onto the iOS devices, and then they were going to be launching onto Android. And after 12 months, they were going to decide whether or not to create an e-commerce site. Other examples around this will be in mobile first and mobile only banks. And a few of these have gotten funding in Europe and in the US in recent months, and I would expect this trend to continue into Asia Pacific, particularly because of the high number of people who use a mobile phone, a smartphone, as their single device to connect to the internet. Our fourth prediction is the accessory market opportunity. And then everyone sees a lot of the new consumer wearables coming out, whether it's internet watches or Google Glass. What we're going to talk about is how you take those consumer wearable devices and make them into solutions. When they first come out, most of the time they're just technologies, and they're very innovative technologies. And I've given some examples here. Some of these measure your brain waves, some measure the muscles in your arm, the muscle movements. But what needs to happen is someone needs to take these technologies and create solutions. An Intelligent M is a great example of this. An Intelligent M creates a band that they actually put on doctors' and nurses' wrists in hospital for a simple purpose of making sure they wash their hands and they're sterilized when they interact with the patient. Now, this might sound basic, but in the US, nearly 100,000 people are killed a year from infections in hospitals. And there's only a 70% compliance rating on doctors and nurses being sterilized before they get in to see a patient. So this actually just helps to reduce the number of bacteria being transmitted around a hospital and therefore reduces the number of deaths. But the solution itself, the device itself, was nothing special. It's a nice band that has been around for a long time, these types of solutions. This is creating a solution on top of it to really change an entire industry. And how is this going to grow? Well, you'll start seeing a lot of ISV communities develop that will start pulling together different applications to extend the usability of these devices. They'll look at it from the analytics perspective. So is there commerce or mobile advertising revenues we can drive from that? But mostly what they need is people with deep vertical industry expertise to drive this. Another example, maybe one that's more realistic for you, is think about the Google Glass. Everyone looks at it from the consumer side and thinks it could be interesting, but what is its real purpose? Well, when you combine Google Glass with augmented reality solutions, it does get very interesting. And if you look at construction, you can now be on a construction site and see what will be there in the future. You can identify where the gas and water mains will be, the electrical points, etc. Another thing could be for warehouses, and this has a huge impact across Asia Pacific due to the large manufacturing sector. You'll be able to look into these massive warehouses and know where something can be found or where it should be placed. And finally, it's about the mining sector. So when you're at a mining site now, you'll be able to look and see if you've been over mining specific areas. You'll know what's beneath the surface. So what's happening is we're leveraging technology to see what isn't there and develop industry-leading solutions. Prediction number 5 relates to the two-sided business models and defining the future revenue streams. And this is important because many of the operators in Asia Pacific are experiencing very low ARPUs. And the challenge they face is that smartphone growth and digital content is driving the bandwidth. But because they have such low ARPUs, they're finding it difficult to fund network upgrades and investments. So they're in a catch-22 situation. They basically know they need to upgrade, but they're not generating the revenues to support it. So what they'll look for is two-sided business models that can actually help them drive revenues for the future. And what we mean by two-sided business models, not getting the revenues from the consumer. Instead, you're getting it from the company that's providing the solution to the consumer. So we've heard about examples of this with the Kindle devices from Amazon, where they work with the operators to guarantee your quality of service and that your data charges don't go too high. And then Amazon will be sharing revenues with that operator. Another example is Netflix, which does high-definition video and movies. And basically, if you did that without having your data capped, it would be cost prohibitive. However, Netflix works with the operators to make sure that they don't actually charge the full amount, and they share that revenue back with them. So it's creating another side to the business model. Our mobility prediction number 6 is tablets will replace laptops. This will become a reality in 2014. And now we're not talking about wholesale replacement, but what you will see in 2014 is most large enterprises starting to replace some laptops with tablets. But I also want to clarify on this. When we talk about tablets replacing laptops in the enterprise, it's much less about Apple, and it's much less about Android, and it's more about Windows 8. And there's some many good, valid reasons why this is happening. Number 1, XP is going end of life. Number 2, Windows 8 will support the existing applications. And if you're IT, you know how to secure it. Also, you already have management and support policies, and these will support Windows 8 as well. And also, it costs a lot less. Now, this doesn't mean that you won't see Apple and Android devices into the enterprise, but when you do, it'll be much more for a specific business process. It could be to support a field services person, or it could be to put in the hands of somebody who works at a counter within a department store to try and change that customer experience. But it's much more about a specific job profile than about an office worker. Prediction number 7 is that the new Asian ODMs will thrive locally and establish a foothold regionally. And what we've seen already is quite a lot of press recently about Xiaomi, Micromax, and some of the other major Asian ODMs. And you're seeing them move outside of their home countries. And why they're doing this is because there's a lot of opportunity there. In the more developed countries on the left of Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, and Singapore, and Korea, what you see is between about 20 to 30% of the devices are going to not be Samsung or Apple. So that makes not that much of a market to go after. However, when you go across to the rest of the countries, on average about 60% of the devices are not going to be Apple or Samsung. which means there's 60% that they can go after. And this is why you're seeing a lot of independent, small ODMs open up in these countries to target that audience. And the people they're targeting can't afford the Samsung or Apple devices in many cases. So they're coming out with very interesting, innovative devices at a very low price point. And this will help drive the whole market. And we've already seen quite a few movements recently. So Micromax has just recently announced it's going to be moving into Russia. Xiaomi is going to be launching in Southeast Asia. And you'll start seeing a lot more of these go after these lucrative segments because there is a lot of room to grow. Our eighth prediction is that hyper-consumerization is just a click away. I'm sure most of you heard what happened during Singles Day in China, and it was pretty fantastic. Taobao smashed mobile shopping record by generating over 100 million in sales in less than an hour. And that's for mobile shopping. 21% of the transactions during a Singles Day were conducted on a mobile device. But it isn't just in China. What we've seen in Southeast Asia is these new e-retailers driving a lot more of their transactions via mobile devices. And in particular, Zalora, by mid-year, was already driving 25% of their revenues from mobile devices. And they were targeting to reach 40% by the end of 2013. Prediction number 9 is the creation of the service provider of the future. And when we look at this, service providers have a very competitive environment to compete in right now. It isn't just about mobility. It combines mobility, social, big data analytics, and cloud, as well as the opportunities that are created within that emerging market and leveraging that third platform to develop innovative industry solutions. And it means that service providers, to do this, they got to move away from talking about systems and start talking about services. It also means that they need to move away from IT agility and go into business agility. And they shouldn't be talking about information. They should be talking about innovation. And the types of solutions we would be looking for them to actually do in a one-to-majority type marketplace is going after the x-commerce space and creating digital marketplaces to go for those shoppers. To help push out digital content, that means they might become aggregators of digital content. Some may even become creators of digital content. It's also a lot about the devices, and then cloud plays an interesting role here. We've already seen a lot of service providers become cloud service providers, but now we expect to see them moving more into the consumer cloud offerings as well. And finally, the holy grail, finding ways to actually interact with and leverage the OTTPs to drive business in the future. Now, there's not really an operator today that can do all of this, but we will expect to see a lot of them move towards it in the coming year. And our final prediction is about a cautious approach to monetizing big data. And the reason we're doing this as a prediction is that many people are convinced that this is going to be the year that people really start making a lot of money off of big data. And we just think there's too many factors that will inhibit that and cause the service providers to be very cautious. And the opportunity is there from a pure business perspective. Operators are becoming much better at developing a 360-degree view of the customer. And they're also gathering information from social media and creating a much bigger and better profile. But the challenge is that most countries have not issued regulations regarding data sovereignty and data protection, so people aren't sure what they're actually able to do with this. But the biggest limitation is the risk of customer backlash. And there is an example of an operator in region who sold data to a vendor in another country. And now this was done, it didn't break any laws. I'm sure it would have been financially lucrative to do it. But the fact of the matter is, they didn't anticipate the customer backlash, and they ended up becoming front page news. And then the company had to come out and say they will never sell that customer data again to a third party. They will always retain ownership. So that's why we're predicting a very cautious approach. Operators might have the data, the money might be there, but they're not just going to go out and sell it because they know what the customers will do. So what they're going to do, though, is still engage in that mobile advertising ecosystem, but they'll actually ask for the requirements, and then they will retain ownership of the customer data as part of their role in the value chain. So with that, I'd like to conclude our top 10 mobility predictions for 2014. If you do have any questions, please feel free to contact us. Thank you for your time.